Welcome to Birmingham General Cemetery, a Grade 2 star listed cemetery located in Birmingham's historic jewellery quarter. Known now as Key Hill, it was opened in 1836 by a group of non-conformist businessmen, that is, those who are not members of the Anglican faith. It was Birmingham's first non-denominational cemetery, the object being to provide a burial ground which would be open to those of all religions and faiths or none. Key Hill holds a range of intriguing catacombs and a wealth of funerary monuments, on which are recorded many of Birmingham's famous and influential residents. With stories as diverse as that of Shakespearian actors, Victorian poets, industrialists, politicians, radical preachers, the first female journalist, and the inventor of egg-free custard. Many of these residents were essential in the establishment of George Dawson's Civic Gospel, the ethos of which was an ambitiously inclusive culture where everything should be for everybody. This movement helped the people of Birmingham create a reputation as a trailblazing modern city. In partnership with the Everything to Everybody project, we would like to tell you more about these Victorian do-gooders.
George Dawson, buried here in Section O of Key Hill Cemetery, was a nonconformist preacher, lecturer and political activist. Born in London on the 24th February 1821, he moved to Birmingham when he was 23 to become a minister at the Mount Zion Baptist Chapel. When he began to welcome all comers to the Baptist Church, he moved to a church built by his supporters named the Church of the Saviour. He preached to his congregation on the Christian Gospel, as well as poetry, Darwinism and Islam. Dawson believed in an ethos that became known as the Civic Gospel. He believed that the time had come to give everything to everybody, referring to his idea that instead of just providing baths, washhouses, prisons and asylums, a city should also have parks, art galleries, libraries and schools. In 1864, for the tercentenary of Shakespeare's birth, Dawson and Birmingham decided to honour the occasion by creating the world's first public Shakespeare library for every citizen of Birmingham to access. For if the gentle poet could himself appear amongst them, that he would wish for no nobler monument than that of being enshrined in the memories and hearts of hard-working men in this town, and the feeling that the conceptions of his mind and his noble expressions were clearing and illuminating the path of the hard-working artisan, that the leaves of his divine works were being turned over by the hardy hands of our own forgemen. On the 30th November 1876, at the age of 55, George Dawson died suddenly at his home in King's Norton. It is claimed that persons of Birmingham mourned the loss of Dawson as if they had lost a brother. A monument was erected above his grave 31 years after his death, which reads, "Coming to Birmingham in 1844, he became a great power for good in all questions affecting the religious, political, municipal and educational events of the town of his adoption. In religion, his teaching was free from the limitations of creed and full of reverence for all forms of sincere faith, being inspired by a firm belief in the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. In politics, he was a fearless but wide reformer, ever insisting on the equal claims of duty and right." Over 150 years ago, George Dawson inspired the people of Birmingham through the teachings of the Civic Gospel, which itself was inspired by the writings of Shakespeare. The Everything to Everybody project will reintroduce the same ethos and open up Birmingham's Shakespeare Memorial Library to the people of Birmingham once more. Marie Bethel Beauclerc is buried close to George Dawson here in Section I of Key Hill Cemetery. Born in London in 1845, she left school at the age of 9 and began to teach herself shorthand out of a manual. On her 13th birthday, she and her mother moved to Birmingham, where she continued her shorthand studies via post with an instructor from Bath. At the age of 18, Beauclerc was employed for 2 months as a scribe for a touring phrenology lecturer visiting Birmingham. Her skills impressed George Dawson, who was at the time the editor of the Birmingham Morning News. He employed her as a shorthand reporter, making her the first female shorthand newspaper reporter in England. She reported on many conferences and lectures, as well as recording the majority of Dawson's sermons and lectures, making up 9 volumes of his ideology. Without her efforts, much of Dawson's work would likely be lost to time. Beauclerc was engaged by numerous other highly respected lecturers and preachers visiting Birmingham due to her impressive reputation. She was appointed teacher of phonography, both at the Peribah Institute and the Birmingham and Midland Institute, a position she held for 14 years. She once again became a pioneer in 1888 when she was appointed as a teacher of shorthand in Rugby School, making her the first female teacher at a public boys' school in England. Along with shorthand, she taught dancing and calisthenics. Beauclerc established a Shorthand Writers' Association in 1887, and she was credited with introducing typewriting to Birmingham. Her papers on phonography in Birmingham were delivered as lectures and are now kept at the University of Bath. In a male-dominated world of reporting and shorthand type, Beauclerc set an impressive example of female abilities and helped open the way for future female stenographers. Beauclerc died on 19th September 1897, aged 53. Her tombstone reads, "This stone was erected by the members of the Church of the Saviour, Birmingham, in grateful recognition of her services, by which many of the prayers, sermons and lectures of the late George Dawson have been preserved." Here, in section R of Key Hill Cemetery, is the burial place for John Davis Mullins, who was born in London in 1832. At the age of 25, he was appointed as librarian in charge of the old Birmingham Library in Union Street, being one of 126 candidates for the job. In 1860, this library amalgamated with the new library in Temple Row West, as plans began to be made for a Birmingham Central Library and reading room. A central lending library and art gallery was opened in September 1865 on a site to the south of Edmund Street and west of the Town Hall. Mullins was appointed as the chief librarian. A reference library followed a year later, and within 8 years there were 3 branch libraries and the Shakespeare Library. The first donations were received on the tercentenary of Shakespeare's birth in 1864 and were housed in a special room in the Central Library completed in 1868, on what is widely observed to be Shakespeare's birth date, 23rd April. The exact date of Shakespeare's birth was never recorded. This library, housed in the new Library of Birmingham, now holds 60,000 volumes, archives and manuscripts, allowing the continuing study of Shakespeare and Renaissance drama. In 1879, a workman tried to unfreeze some gas pipes in the Central Library and set alight some wood shavings, which led to an inferno. The Birmingham and Aston fire brigades fought the fire heroically, but the library was virtually destroyed. Even the mayor helped to smash glass cabinets to save 500 precious volumes in the Shakespeare Library, including the first folio. After the fire, John Mullins considered retirement, but was persuaded to stay on and rebuild. A temporary library was replaced by a new building in 1882, more branches were opened, and it was a huge success. John Mullins retired due to ill health in 1898, when the library held over 233,000 volumes, and he died 2 years later in 1900. His lasting legacy will be his work on cataloguing the Shakespeare Memorial Library contents in 1872, which his obituary in the Birmingham Daily Post described to be unique in its completeness and comprehensiveness. The grave of Charles Reece Pemberton is located here in section O of Key Hill Cemetery. As you can see, the headstone has been lost, but burial records allow us to know the position where he was laid to rest. Charles Reece Pemberton was an actor and public lecturer. He was born in 1790 in Pontypool, Wales, and was registered as Thomas Reece Pemberton. His family moved to Birmingham in 1794, and he was sent to study at a Unitarian charity school. When he was old enough, he apprenticed to his uncle, a brass founder, but aged 17 he ran away from home to Liverpool and was press-ganged into the Navy. After 7 years of service, Pemberton left the Navy and lived in the West Indies for a time, finding employment as an actor and as a theatre manager. At this time, Pemberton was described as a wanderer, constantly moving about. In 1827, back in England, Pemberton began acting in plays by Shakespeare, gaining praise for his portrayal as tragic characters, but was criticised for his portrayal of comedic characters. After performing at the Royal Theatre in Birmingham, Pemberton chose to concentrate on reciting and lecturing about Shakespeare, particularly enjoying talking about Shakespeare's tragedies. Pemberton wrote about his experience for the Monthly Repository, a Unitarian periodical that, at the time of Pemberton's contributions, was edited by William Johnson Fox. He also wrote plays, songs and poems that were published in the magazine. On 3rd March 1840, after a period of ill health, Charles Pemberton died at the age of 50. Reports from the time of his death state that the following epitaph, written by Fox, was inscribed on his gravestone. His gentle and fervid nature, his acute susceptibility, and his aspirations to the beautiful and true were developed and exercised through a life of vicissitude, and often of privation and disappointment. As a public lecturer, he has left a lasting memorial in the minds of the many whom he guided to a perception of the genius of Shakespeare in its diversified and harmonizing powers. At oppression and hypocrisy he spurned with a force proportioned to that wherewith he clung to justice and freedom, kindness and sincerity, ever prompt to generous toil. He won for himself from the world only the poet's dowry, the hate of hate, the scorn of scorn, the love of love. Here in section R of Key Hill Cemetery is the grave of John Alfred Langford. He was born in Birmingham on 12th September 1823 and began his early education under the instruction of his mother Harriet before completing his studies at a private school. He joined his father's chair-making firm at the age of 10 and became an apprentice when he was 13. In 1847, when he was 24, Langford joined the new Unitarian Church of the Saviour, which had been founded by George Dawson. Langford, along with a group of friends, started meeting at each other's houses to discuss philosophical, political and social matters, calling themselves the Inner Circle. In 1850, 3 members, Langford, William Harris and Henry Latham, published a volume of poems that had emerged from these sessions. In the winter of 1850 to 1851, Langford, a lover of books and literature, started teaching in the schools of Dawson's Church, and he opened a small news vendor's and bookseller's shop. In 1852, Langford sold his shop and went into business with his father-in-law, printing his own works and those of his friends. In 1855, Langford became sub-editor of the newly founded radical Birmingham Daily Press, which was well received but was a commercial failure. In 1858, Langford helped with the acquisition of Aston Hall Park and served as manager, living on the estate until he was purchased by the corporation in 1864. Whilst there, he continued to write, contributing to papers such as the Birmingham Daily Gazette, a liberal conservative daily paper, from which he withdrew due to his radical views. From 1868 to 1874, he was a teacher at the Birmingham and Midland Institute and promoted the public libraries of the day, publishing an account of them and the Birmingham Art Gallery and Museum in 1871. Langford died on 24th January 1903, aged 79 years old. Amongst the books he wrote were Modern Birmingham and its Institutions from 1841 to 1871 and A Century of Birmingham Life from 1741 to 1841, which are invaluable to Birmingham historians. I hope you have enjoyed this brief insight into the people buried here in Key Hill Cemetery. If you'd like to learn more about the people buried within Key Hill or Warstone Lane cemeteries, Or if you want to find out more about the Everything to Everybody project, you can go to links in this video's description. If you'd like to help us to continue with our work, you can donate to the Jewellery Quarter Research Trust's GoFundMe page. The link is in the description, and all the proceeds will go towards the production of more virtual tours.